25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 1, 2.
Patients in the intensive care unit are highly susceptible to hospital-acquired infections, which are often caused by the bacteria Staphylococcus aureus. The transmission of methicillin-resistant S. aureus, or MRSA, is particularly concerning in these patients. The CDC recommends using hand hygiene and isolation precautions to decrease the transmission of MRSA infections. A major obstacle, however, to implementing these techniques is strict adherence. All healthcare workers who enter a patient's room must wash their hands and don personal protective equipment, or PPE, every time, and then remove their PPE and wash their hands again when leaving the room. This is time-consuming and, of course, does not always happen within the busy life of a hospital. Evidence has also shown that patients under contact precautions receive less face-to-face interaction with healthcare workers and experience delays in their admission and discharge from the hospital.
Oh crap, I need the call light by the bed. It's okay, I don't have time. I'll just do it real quick.
MRSA is associated with higher mortality and morbidity rates. For instance, one study compared mortality risk between methicillin-sensitive S. aureus infections and MRSA infections in ICU patients. Patients with MRSA infections were found to have a 50% higher risk of hospital death. Furthermore, MRSA is associated with longer hospital stays. One study, for example, found that patients with MRSA bloodstream infections stayed in the hospital 9.2 days longer than patients without a S. aureus infection. This means the cost of care is also increased for patients with MRSA. The traditional method of using hand hygiene and isolation precautions to decrease the transmission of MRSA is also expensive. One study, for example, examined how much money was saved after discontinuing contact precautions for MRSA and vancomycin-resistant enterococcus, or VRE, in a hospital. They calculated that in 1 year, $729,572 could be saved from decreased use of isolation gowns, and $4.6 million could be saved from time nurses no longer had to spend donning PPE for MRSA and VRE. So how can we, as healthcare professionals, control MRSA transmission rates among ICU patients while also cutting down costs? The answer is replacing isolation precautions with daily chlorhexidine bathing. This technique is simple, cost-effective, and efficient. Chlorhexidine gluconate is an antibacterial with a persistent antimicrobial effect that works against numerous infectious agents, including S. aureus. Furthermore, a 4-ounce bottle of chlorhexidine gluconate can be purchased for only $1.75. This cost is virtually non-existent when compared to the cost of care for an ICU patient that contracts MRSA. Lastly, chlorhexidine bathing just has to be done once a day. Some may argue that such bathing is not needed and is just another task to complete in an already busy schedule. However, the few minutes it would take to give each patient a chlorhexidine bath would be much less than the time it would take a nurse to don PPE every time he or she enters and exits a patient's room. Chlorhexidine bathing is also evidence-based. For example, one study found that MRSA transmission rates exhibited a significantly decreased trend over the course of 16 months of implementing daily bathing with chlorhexidine-impregnated washcloths in an ICU with MRSA endomysticity. Another study found that MRSA transmission rates decreased by over 20% after daily bathing with a chlorhexidine-based soap was implemented in an ICU. However, isolation precautions were not discontinued in either of these studies. Daily chlorhexidine bathing was simply added to these precaution techniques to see if it could cause a further decrease in MRSA transmission rates. So how effective is daily chlorhexidine bathing in preventing MRSA transmission on its own?
Hello, Mr. Smith. I'm here to give you your chlorhexidine bath. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right.
And that's all we need for audio, right? One study calculated MRSA transmission rates for 1 year when traditional contact precautions were implemented and then compared these rates to those calculated for the following year when only daily chlorhexidine bathing was conducted. Not only did MRSA transmission rates decrease once contact precautions were replaced with daily chlorhexidine bathing, but it was estimated that approximately $5 million was saved in the process. Thus, research suggests that chlorhexidine bathing is just as effective, if not more so, than standard contact precautions in preventing the transmission of MRSA. It also is much more cost-effective. However, further research needs to be done to confirm the results of this study. In order to successfully implement the change from isolation precautions to daily chlorhexidine bathing, education is key. Staff will simply not comply with a new policy and add another step to their already busy day unless they know that this step will provide better patient outcomes. For daily chlorhexidine bathing, education should start with the nursing assistive personnel, or CNA, as they will actually be performing the bath. Education must not only be given ahead of time based on the reasoning of the new policy, but also on the methodology. Chlorhexidine baths must also avoid the face, genitals, and open wounds, and they must be given with chlorhexidine-compatible soaps. Not only must staff be informed of when, how, and why chlorhexidine baths must be completed, but supplies must also be available to the staff members at all times so that the new policy change can go into effect. Often the supplies needed to carry out a new change are not immediately stocked or may be stocked in a specific unknown area. Thus, supplies must be made available and staff members must be well informed of the location of these supplies. However, chlorhexidine baths are already a common practice in healthcare today, and supplies for them should be readily available. Finally, a measurable goal must be set into place that allows staff to visualize how closely they are following this new policy. For instance, one hospital utilized a weekly analysis comparing the number of patient days and the number of chlorhexidine bottles used. This analysis keeps staff accountable for the amount of chlorhexidine baths that they are able to give in a day. A reward system, such as a raffle of prizes, could also be put into place to further encourage staff participation. Once daily chlorhexidine bathing becomes a part of the staff's daily routine, it will likely be continued on into the future.